I am 82 years old, and today I want to tell you something nobody wants to admit. You do not owe your adult children the rest of your life. We are programmed from a very young age to believe that a good parent is a person who bleeds for their family forever. We are told that family is the ultimate anchor, and that keeping those relationships alive means sacrificing every ounce of your own comfort until the very end. But I am sitting here today to tell you that this is a dangerous lie. It is a lie that will drain the final, beautiful years right out of your bones. Let me tell you about my life right now. It is a Tuesday morning. It is 6 in the morning. I live in a small wooden house at the end of a quiet road. The sun is just starting to push through the old oak trees outside my kitchen window. I am sitting in a green velvet armchair. This chair is old, and the fabric is worn down on the armrests from years of me running my hands over it. I have a white ceramic mug of black coffee sitting on the small wooden table next to me. The coffee is bitter and hot, exactly the way I have made it for 50 years. The house is completely silent. The only sound is the ticking of the grandfather, the clock in the hallway, and the occasional creak of the floorboards as the house settles in the morning chill. There is a faint smell of old paper, dried lavender and wood polish. This silence is my sanctuary. It is a physical thing that I wrap around my shoulders every single morning. I wake up when I want to wake up. I sit in my garden and watch the birds. I read books about history. I take slow walks down to the lake. I do not rush for anyone. I do not panic. I simply exist in a state of deep, undisturbed peace. But this peace did not come naturally. I had to fight a terrible war to get it. I spent my entire life being responsible. My wife Evelyn and I were married for 46 years. We raised 3 children. I worked as a manager at a heavy machinery plant. I worked 60 hours a week for 35 years. I stood on concrete floors until my knees ached so badly I could hardly walk to my car. Evelyn worked just as hard at home raising the children, stretching a small paycheck to cover groceries, and winter coats managing the endless, chaotic noise of a full household. We did what we were supposed to do. We carried the heavy load of adulthood. We put our children through school now. We paid for weddings. We helped with down payments. We sacrificed our own youth and our own dreams to make sure they had a foundation to build their lives upon. When Evelyn passed away 7 years ago, the silence in this house felt like a punishment. I was lost. I wandered through the empty rooms like a ghost. I missed the voice of Evelyn. I missed the clatter of her baking pans in the kitchen. I missed the simple comfort of having another breathing soul in the room. Society tells you that living alone as an old man is a tragic fate. My neighbors looked at me with pity in their eyes. My friends at the hardware store spoke to me in soft, sad voices. And my children, my 3 successful, busy, stressed adult children, decided that I needed to be rescued. They decided that I was lonely and that the only cure for my loneliness was to become fully integrated into their chaotic lives. My oldest daughter, Sarah, is 48 years old. She lives 30 miles away in a massive modern house. She and her husband are always working, always running, always trying to keep up with an invisible race. They have 3 children, 2 dogs, and a schedule that looks like a military operation. About 4 years ago, Sarah started calling me with small requests. She would ask if I could drive over on a Wednesday afternoon to let the repairman into her house. She would ask if I could pick the boys up from soccer practice because she was stuck in a meeting. She would ask if I could watch the toddler on a Saturday night so she and her husband could attend a charity dinner. At first I said yes. I wanted to be a good father. I wanted to be the loving grandfather. I believe the story that a family must always stay deeply entangled. I thought that by helping her, I was proving my worth. I thought I was earning my place in the world as an old. People at the grocery store would see me buying snacks for the grandchildren, and they would smile. They would tell me how wonderful it was that I was so active and how lucky my daughter was to have free child care, how beautiful it is to see multiple generations supporting each other. I smiled back, but inside a slow, dark exhaustion was beginning to take root. Before I fully realized what was happening, my life was no longer my own. I had become an unpaid, exhausted employee in the household of my daughter. My beautiful, quiet mornings were destroyed. My phone would vibrate on the nightstand at 6 in the morning with a text message from Sarah asking me to bring extra milk when I came over. Later, the phone became an instrument of anxiety. Every time it buzzed my stomach, tightened. I knew it was another demand, another crisis I had to solve, another piece of my time being stolen. I was driving 60 miles round trip on a crowded highway 4 days a week. The traffic was loud and aggressive. My old eyes struggled with the glare of the brake lights. When I arrived at the house of Sarah Baum, the environment was completely toxic to my nervous system. Her house was an explosion of plastic toys, unwashed dishes, and constant, inescapable noise. The television in the living room was always blaring cartoons at full volume. The dog was always barking. The children were always screaming, fighting, or demanding something. I loved my grandchildren, but being around them for 8 hours a day was like standing in the middle of a hurricane. I would sit in her living room, trapped on a modern gray sofa that was terrible for my back, holding a crying toddler trying to feed him a bottle, while the older boys ran around me in circles. I would look at the ugly modern art on her walls and feel a deep, suffocating sense of despair. I was eating leftover chicken nuggets for lunch. I was spending my fixed retirement income on gasoline and emergency trips to the pharmacy to buy diapers. I was missing my afternoon naps. I was missing my quiet walks down by the lake. I was missing my books. I was missing my own life. The physical toll was devastating. At 82 years old, your body is a fragile machine. It requires gentle handling. It requires rest. I was lifting 30-pound children out of car seats. I was bending over to pick up thousands of tiny plastic building blocks from the carpet. I was standing in her kitchen for an hour cooking dinners because she said she was too tired to cook when she got home from the office. I was taking high blood pressure medication and my joints throbbed with a dull, relentless pain every single night. I would drive home in the dark and pull into my driveway, and I would be too exhausted to even turn on the lights in my own house. I then would just sit in my velvet chair in the dark, too tired to make a cup of tea, too tired to read then, too tired to even think. I was completely drained. And the worst part was the absolute lack of respect for my time. Sarah did not view my time as valuable because I was retired. She assumed my time was empty and worthless. She assumed I had nothing better to do than to serve her. She would come home an hour late from work without calling to warn me. She would walk through the front door, still talking loudly on her cell phone, wearing her expensive coat, and she would walk right past me. She would not ask how my day was. She would not ask how my back was feeling. She would just point to the kitchen and ask if I had managed to get the dishes loaded into the dishwasher. She treated me like an appliance. She treated me like a convenience that came with no monthly fee. I started to feel a deep, dark resentment toward my own daughter. I hated driving to her house. I hated the sound of her ringtone. And then I felt a crushing wave of guilt for feeling that way. I then told myself I was a terrible person. I told myself that a good father would push through the pain. I told myself that family is family and you never turn your back on them. I was trapped in a prison made of guilt and obligation, and the walls were closing in. Let us explore the friends and the neighbors for a moment, because they are part of the trap. I have a neighbor named Thomas. Thomas is 78 years old. He is a good man, but he is terrified of his own shadow. He is terrified of being forgotten. Thomas spends every waking moment trying to prove he is still relevant. He runs errands for his adult children all day long. He mows their lawns. He fixes their cars. I see him walking back to his house in the evening, his shoulders slumped, his face gray with exhaustion. He stops by my fence. Sometimes. He leans against the wood, breathing heavily, and he tells me how busy he is. He says it with a twisted sense of pride. He says his family simply cannot survive without him. He wears his exhaustion like a medal of honor. He looks at my quiet garden. He looks at me sitting with a book, and he gets uncomfortable. He asks me what I do all day. He asks me if I am bored. He asks me if I feel useless. Look at Thomas, and I feel a profound sadness. He has traded his freedom for the illusion of importance. He thinks that if he stops being useful, his family will stop loving him. He thinks his only value is in what he can provide, not in who he is. And the tragic truth is, he might be right about them, but he is wrong about himself. I tell him that. I am not useless, I am retired. I tell him I am not bored. I am peaceful. But he cannot understand it. His mind is locked inside the societal demand that an old man must either be invisible or be a workhorse. I also remember the pressure from the medical professionals. You go to the doctor for a routine checkup at 80 years old, and they always ask the same questions. They look at you over their clipboards with a clinical detachment. They ask if you have a strong support system. They ask if you live alone. When you say, "Yes, I live alone," they write something down with a slight frown. They suggest you join a senior center. They suggest you move into a community. They operate on the assumption that an old man alone in a house is a disaster waiting to happen. They want to mitigate risk, but they do not understand that mitigating risk often means destroying the very quality of life they are trying to preserve. I do not want to sit in a brightly lit room at a senior center playing cards with people I do not care about, eating terrible food just to prove to the world that I am socialized. I wanted to sit on my own porch, smell the rain on my own pine trees, and listen to the classical music I chose to play on my own radio. Let us talk about the money. This is the part families really hate to discuss. When you are integrated into the chaotic lives of your adult children and they treat your wallet like it is an extension of their own. It is never large requests. It is the death by 1,000 small cuts. It is paying for the pizza when you babysit. It is putting $20 in the gas tank because you are driving the kids everywhere. It is buying the birthday presents, the school supplies, the extra groceries. I worked on a factory floor. My pension is not a gold mine. It is a carefully calculated sum designed to keep me comfortable until I die. When I was deeply entangled in the life of Sarah, I watched my bank account slowly drain. I was terrified of living too. Long and running out of money, all because I was subsidizing a lifestyle for my daughter that she could not actually afford. When I walked away, I reclaimed my financial security. I can buy the good coffee now. I can afford to heat my house properly in the winter. Financial independence in old age is a critical pillar of peace. You cannot have peace if you are lying awake at 3 in the morning doing mental math, wondering if you can afford to fix your water heater because you bought your grandson a new bicycle. The breaking point for me arrived on a Tuesday in November. It was a cold, miserable day. The rain was falling in heavy sheets, and the sky was a dark, bruising gray. I had been at the house of Sarah since 7 in the morning because her youngest child had a slight fever and could not go to daycare. I had spent 8 hours dealing with a cranky, crying child. I had cleaned a terrible mess in the bathroom. I had scrubbed sticky juice off the hardwood floors. My lower back was burning with a sharp, shooting pain. I had a big headache that throbbed behind my eyes. Sarah came home at 6 in the evening. She was in a foul mood. She dropped her heavy leather bag on the kitchen counter with a loud thud. She looked around the kitchen, completely ignoring the fact that I had kept her sick child safe and comforted all day. She looked at a single dirty coffee cup left on the table, and she sighed heavily. She looked at me and said, in a tone dripping with irritation, that she wished I would try to keep the house a little tidier when I was there because she was too stressed to deal with a mess. I stopped, breathing for a moment. I stood there in her expensive kitchen, wearing my old brown sweater, smelling like baby milk and exhaustion. I looked at this woman, my little daughter. I remembered working overtime shifts in the factory to buy her braces. I remembered staying awake for 3 nights straight when she had pneumonia as a teenager. I remembered giving her a check for $10,000 from my savings to help her buy this very house. And I realized, in a sudden, blinding flash of clarity, that I was invisible to her. She did not love the man I was today. She only loved the services I provided. I was sacrificing my final, precious years of health on the altar of her convenience, and she did not even have the grace to say thank you. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not cry. I experienced the cold, absolute clarity of a man who has finally woken up from a very long, very bad dream. I walked over to the coat rack and took my old wool coat. I put it on slowly, buttoning every single button. Sarah stopped, looking at her phone, and stared at me. She asked what I was doing. She said she needed me to stay and watch the baby while she ran to the grocery store. I looked her directly in the eyes. I kept my voice incredibly soft and completely firm. I told her that I was going home. I told her that I was not going to watch the baby tonight. I told her that I was not coming back tomorrow. I told her that I was never coming back to be her babysitter again. She looked at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Her face went pale, and then it turned red with anger. She started to speak quickly. She said I was being unreasonable. She said she had a career, and she relied on me. She said I was being incredibly selfish. She said I was abandoning my family. She said used every word designed to make me feel guilty. She tried to throw the heavy chains of obligation right back over my shoulders. But the chains did not. They simply fell to the floor. I looked at her, and I spoke. The truest words I have ever spoken in my 82 years on this earth. I told her that I loved her, but I loved myself too. I told her that I had spent 40 years raising my children, and I had done a good job, but my job was finished. I told her that she chose to have 3 children. She chose to have a massive house, and she chose to have a high-stress career, and it was time for her to manage the life she had chosen. I told her that my life was almost over, and I was going to spend whatever time I had left in peace. I walked out the front door. The rain was cold against my face, but it felt like a baptism. I got into my old car, turned the key, and drove away. I did not look back at the house. I drove carefully through the rain, and with every mile that passed, a massive, crushing weight lifted off of my chest. I could feel my lungs expanding. I could feel the tension draining out of my neck. When I pulled into my own driveway, it was dark. The house was silent. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. I did not turn on the main lights. I just turned on a small yellow lamp in the corner of the living room. I took off my wet coat I walked into the kitchen and made myself a simple cup of hot tea. I walked back into the living room and sat down in my green velvet armchair. The silence wrapped around me. It was not a lonely silence. It was a rich, beautiful, healing silence. I listened to the rain hitting the window panes. I listened to the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. I drank my tea slowly, tasting the warm, earthy flavor. I looked around my empty, quiet, perfect house, and I smiled. I smiled until tears rolled down my wrinkled cheeks. I was free. I had reclaimed my life. That was 2 years ago. I am still here in my quiet house. I see Sarah sometimes on holidays or for a brief lunch. Our relationship is distant now, but it is honest. She had to hire a nanny. She had to downsize her life. She had to learn how to carry her own weight. And I learned how to protect my peace. You must understand the deep psychological shift that happens when you finally embrace the quiet. The quiet is intimidating at first. When you strip away the noise of your children and the demands of the schedule and the constant vibration of the cell phone, you are left with nothing but yourself. For the first few weeks after I walked out here of the kitchen of Saragama, the silence in my house was almost deafening. I had spent so long reacting to other people that I did not know how to act for myself. My brain was still looking for problems to solve. I then would wake up at 6 in the morning with a jolt of adrenaline, thinking I had to rush to get in the car. It took time to detoxify my nervous system. It took months for the cortisol to leave my bloodstream. But slowly the quiet stopped being an absence of noise, and it became a presence. It became a companion. I started to notice things I had ignored for decades. I noticed the exact way the light shifts across the wooden floorboards in the late afternoon. I noticed the complex, intricate patterns of frost on the window panes in January. I remembered old memories, memories of Evelyn when we were young, memories of my own childhood memories that had been buried under decades of stress and obligation. When you stop running, your soul finally has a chance to catch up with your body. People are terrified of aging alone because they are terrified of facing themselves. They use their chaotic families as a distraction from the inevitable reality of your mortality. They think that if they are surrounded by screaming grandchildren and ringing phones, death will somehow overlook them. But death comes for us all, whether we are in a crowded room or a quiet cabin. I prefer the quiet cabin. I want to meet the end of my life with a clear mind and a calm heart. I do not want my final thought to be a worry about the credit card bill of another person or a forgotten soccer cleat. I want my final thought to be a deep, profound gratitude for the peace I managed to build. I know there are people listening to this right now who are trapped in the exact same prison I was in. You are sitting in a house that does not feel like yours. You are exhausted, you are in pain, and you are terrified of saying no to the people you love. You have been brainwashed by a society that tells you older people have no value unless they are serving the young. You have been told that wanting to be alone, wanting to rest, wanting to protect your energy is a selfish and shameful thing. I am here to tell you that you are not selfish. You are not broken. You are not a bad parent. You are a human being who has survived decades of hard labor and emotional turmoil and endless sacrifice. You have paid your dues to society. You have paid your dues to your family. The debt is settled. The account is closed. When you reach this age, your energy is a finite resource. It is like water in a small, shallow well. Every time you say yes to something you do not want to do, every time you let someone bring their chaos into your life, you are letting them drop a bucket into your well and steal your water. And when the well runs dry, you are the one who has to suffer the thirst. They will just move on to the next source. Look at your life. Look at the people who claim to need you. Decide if they are loving you or if they are consuming you. Decide if you are a respected elder or if you are a free utility. It requires immense bravery to look at your own family and realize they are taking advantage of you. It requires even more bravery to put a stop to it. You will be called difficult. You will be called stubborn. You will be accused of changing, of becoming cold. Let them say it. Their disappointment is not your emergency. Their inability to manage their own lives is not your failing. Do not wait for your children to give you permission to rest. They will not. Never give it to you. They are too consumed by their own lives to see your exhaustion. You have to take your rest. You have to build a big fortress around your peace and defend it with everything you have. Lock your doors. Turn off your phone. Cancel the plans you are dreading. Sit in your chair. Drink your coffee and stare at the wall. If that is what brings you joy, you do not owe the world a performance of endless vitality. You only owe yourself a peaceful departure. Living alone is not a tragedy. Silence is not a punishment. The true tragedy is reaching the very end of your life and realizing you spent your final golden days being treated as a servant by the people you love the most. You have crossed the vast, treacherous ocean of adulthood. You have weathered the storms of raising a family, maintaining a marriage, and holding down a job, and surviving the countless tragedies that life throws at every human being. You have reached the shore. You are allowed to sit on the sand. You are allowed to close your eyes. You are allowed to listen to the waves and ignore the people drowning in the shallow water behind you because you already taught them how to swim. Do not let the fear of dying alone force you to live in a way that makes you wish you were already dead. Reclaim your space, reclaim your time, reclaim your money, reclaim your absolute right to do nothing. The quiet is not your enemy. The quiet is where you finally meet yourself. And at 82, I have found that I am excellent company. Peace is expensive. Stop giving it away for free.